Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. Welcome to TechStrong TV Week 2. Today is Tuesday, April 7th. Hope you all enjoyed your weekend and your Monday wasn't too bad. And we're back now on Tuesday here as we continue to roll through the week. I would imagine if you guys are like me, many of you are probably kind of settling into your routines now of working from home and quarantine and so forth. We've got to keep our head down. There is some promising numbers that I've been seeing from various hotspots, but they do anticipate this is going to be a tough week, and I hope this week finds you all well, healthy, your loved ones, and that this scourge doesn't hit any of you too close to home. Anyway, though, you didn't come here for the negative. Let's get on the positive. We've got a great lineup today for TechStrong TV. We're going to start off today with something that's going to be a weekly feature on TechStrong TV. TechStrong TV, of course, goes out on the Digital Anarchist network, so it's at techstrong.tv, digitalanarchist.live, Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live. It's on the Media Ops properties, Devops.com, Security Boulevard Container Journal. It's also on our mobile apps on iOS and Android, the Devops.com mobile app. And then I like watching it this way best. I watch it on our OTT channels, which are on Roku, Apple TV, or Amazon Fire. So while you're working on your computer, you could have your TV playing in the background. And again, download the Devops.com app for Roku, Apple TV, or Amazon Fire, and you can watch it there. And it's available on demand there at all times. Anyway, the reason I bring it all up is my co-founder of Digital Anarchist is John Willis, Bachagaloop. I don't think he needs any introduction to most of you out here in the world of DevOps and DevSecOps. So John's now, of course, at Red Hat and doing great work there, along with a great team of folks. But he's going to try every Tuesday to give us either a presentation from himself or interviewing some of his friends, especially as we lead up to TechStrong Con, our conference coming up on June 4th, of which John kind of heads up the speaker committee and has been getting a great lineup of speakers together. So we'll give you more news on that probably by later this week, including the first round of speakers. That's at techstrongcon.com. But anyway, so John's going to do his first piece for TechStrong TV today. It's a presentation that John kind of wrote himself and has worked on now for a while. It's DevOps and Business Continuity. It's a little long. It's about an hour, 50-something minutes. And so we're going to break it up into 3 parts, but you'll see all 3 parts today. Just to give you a little break, though, we have broken it, with 2 breaks into it, so it's 3 parts. So you'll be hearing from John. Of course, we'll do our daily sort of news and what's happening out in the tech world, and then we have Charlene O'Hanlon, who's going to be doing a great interview with Chip Childers, who's the new Cloud Foundry Foundation Executive Director. I don't know if you guys caught that, but Abby has stepped down, and Chip Childers is now the Executive Director for Cloud Foundry Foundation. So Charlene has her. And then after that, we're going to join our regular Analyst Corner with Mitchell Ashley. And Mitchell is going to explore accelerated research into the impact of COVID-19 on IT organizations, reliance on cloud-based services, and opportunities to reshape our future during this current kind of disruption and cycle. And then also Mitchell has a great Vimeo video of DevOps and neuroscience And it's great if anyone implementing DevOps in an existing development team soon encounters cultures as a key success factor to transforming the organization. Helen Beale, one of the ASG analyst team from over across the pond in UK, explores understanding neuroscience and improves leaders' ability to lead people through change. And we're certainly living through change. So we've got two really good pieces from Accelerated Strategies Group today. So I hope you'll enjoy that as well. And then, of course, we'll wrap things up. So it's going to be a pretty long day today. I hope you'll stay with us. Of course, you can always stop and start, and you can watch it on demand. I want to announce one other thing that's out today, and I alluded to it last week and yesterday. We have our Slack channel up. So if you go to techstrongtv.slack.com, you can actually apply, just put your email address in, and it'll generate an invite to the TechStrong TV Slack channel. And you guys can comment, make suggestions, talk to anyone who's presenting here on TechStrong TV, or anything else you want to say. You know, even criticism if you make it constructive. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So techstrongtv.slack.com, sign up for it, and we'll see you out on the Slack. Anyway, with that being said then, let's jump into the first part one of John Willis's DevOps and Business Continuity. So we'll go over to John.
Good morning. My name is John Willis. This is part of the TechStrong video stream service. I'm part of Digital Anarchist. I'm going to be doing this every Tuesday morning around this time. Sort of the next couple, I'm going to be interviewing people, and so some really good guests. But I figured I'd kick this off on something I've had a little bit of interest of late. It's something I've been thinking about. Sort of what does DevOps and business continuity mean during sort of this where we are today. So I'm, for those who don't know me, I'm Senior Director of Global Transition Office at Red Hat, Jay Willis at Red Hat. So so one of the things I wanted to make sure that was clear to everybody, which was I wanted to put a disclaimer. I know everybody's out there, racing fast to sort of tell you how they solved this sort of crisis and all that stuff. And I will admit that I'm being a little opportunistic, but for those who know me, I'm really looking at this as sort of a thought exercise, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about, which is sort of business continuity, not only pre sort of what I would call meta crisis like COVID-19, but also just in general, and even more specifically, in almost every conversation I've had with clients and friends who run large delivery service businesses in large companies, every one of them is sort of up to their head in business continuity discussions, and even more specifically, there's these crazy war stories of all the things that are sort of breaking. So I thought I'd sort of walk through this thing again with the clear sort of objective of really to use this as a thought exercise, and really my call to arms, if you will, is to sort of continue this conversation in some form, even if it's just tweeting to me or calling me or sending an email, and just continuing. I'm continuing to interview people too, so this is really an interesting topic for me. So the agenda for today is I want to tell you a little about this new office, why I came to Red Hat. I came to Red Hat in October, explain that. And then sort of a more deeper than I just did in the disclaimer of why are we here? Why did I think about this presentation? What's going on? And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time sort of dissecting, what business continuity looks like in most of the places I visit and customers. And I'll actually use a retail company. I won't tell the name of the company, but it's actually a recent business continuity plan for this company. We'll walk through that. And again, I'm trying to contrast like why are we here? What do we look like over the last 10 years? What have we done right, on sort of the banner of DevOps, and then sort of look at business continuity and where it stands, and then brings us to the sort of fourth bullet, which is what are the opportunities here? How can we sort of like maybe use this opportunity to learn some things? I've got a really good case study from a top 10 bank that was really sort of invested heavily in the sort of, I'll call it DevOps, but modernization. And then, finally sort of end up with sort of the, what do we learn? What can we do? That kind of stuff, right? So the GTO office was formed in October. On the far left is Andrew Clay Schaefer, one of the founders of the Devops movement, along with myself, founders in the sense that we were sort of in early, shoulder of giants, in that lots of people contributed to build this thing, and Patrick. And I've known Andrew for many years. He was a founder of Puppet, and we've been good friends and collaborated on many things. And in October last year, actually prior to October, he had been working with Red Hat executives about, could he form a team there that sort of inject some outside influence with some leaders in the industry. So he formed this team, and the person next to him was Kevin Bear. He was the co-author of the Phoenix Project. That's me, the short guy there. For those who don't know, I wrote, co-authored DevOps Handbook, Beyond the Phoenix Project, and a lot of publications. And then to the right is Jay Bloom, who's been working with Kevin forever. He's just sort of brilliant. No other way. I mean, these are all really, really smart guys. And it's been fun. You'll start seeing more and more of what we're producing, and some of the ideas of sort of how we're thinking about the prior 10 years and now the next 10 years, right? So, one of the sort of taglines when they announced the GTO, which it was like, Red Hat was saying, we've been telling people that to use these books. Now we have the authors, right? So kind of corny, but a little bit true. So, I promise you the why are we here? I think, there's, I get this from Jay Bloom, who I work with, but in epistemology, there's something called epistemic crisis. Epistemic crisis. Sorry about that, folks. But yeah, it is what it is. But it's how we know about the world. It's sort of a study of, when our world suddenly changed, our mental models, do our habits fit the practices? Usually they don't. There's something we refer to a lot during this is a meta crisis. So I believe COVID-19 is a meta crisis. And so there's sort of, not just hard to act, but because we're disrupted, but it's hard because our decision filters are all messed up because, right? So we know a lot more on this, right? And so I'll let somebody a lot smarter than me, like Jay, explain this in a lot more detail. But I thought this was an interesting way to sort of think about and sort of continue a discussion about business continuity and so in general, this meta crisis of COVID-19. So yes, we're here because COVID-19, and again, I'll refer to it as a meta crisis from here on in, clearly has exposed major fault lines and cracks in our processes. It's maximizing our stress of notions of adaptive capacity, anticipatory awareness, disruptions to not just our work, but our home, our health, our social. And again, not just sort of, the emphasis is like DevOps is great and BCM is horrible. It's like everything's is sort of disrupted and we're having to rethink and our filters are messed up. So a lot of this, again, is really sort of the thought exercise to sort of understand the gaps between some of the things that sort of I've been involved in the last 10 years, we'll call it DevOps, and some of the things that I believe that for most organizations have been sort of lagging behind, like sort of business continuity management. And so if we look at, modernization, so what have we been doing over the last 10 years? And not everybody, but the companies that are nimble, and again, the case study company I'm going to talk about, which is a financial institution, is a great example of investing heavily in adaptive capacity, being nimble, if you will. But open source, right? We don't need to go over this in too detail, but starting way back, over a decade ago, MySQL showing up in enterprises, then sort of Jenkins and Chef, Puppet, Ansible for infrastructure as code, configuration management code, and real recently containers, Kubernetes, right? All those things, right? And then of course cloud, and cloud doesn't exist without open source, right? Most of you should know that. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, SaaSes, API economies, sort of REST, microservices, so you combine that with sort of cloud and sort of containers and Kubernetes, right? You're sort of now sort of getting this, sort of, I'll call it steroid effect of how your services are sort of interacting. And again, I'm not saying it's all magical and perfect. Everything's hard. No, there's no easy path to anything in this industry. But the dynamics have changed from the classic sort of waterfall monolith notion. Maybe if we went back to 10 years ago, maybe longer, And then sort of just Agile, right? Agile Manifesto, Scrum, Kanban. And then, like I said, I was going to just use DevOps as sort of the conversational umbrella for the purpose of this presentation. So if you hate that, well, tough. No, so sorry. This is an interesting slide I've come across in sort of the, right? One thing, working with a big company, you get to steal like really smart people's slides, right? Like, and it's not stealing because it's your company, right? So it's really cool. So I didn't create this slide, but I did change it a little bit. Like this whole notion of silos, right? There's a lot of discussion about sort of DevOps is breaking down silos. And I just want to illustrate like the sort of obvious engineering and operations, command flow. I don't really want to get into Conway's law too deep here, right? But your sort of behavior and your delivery are based on your sort of organizational structure. And again, some of my working theory and some evidence, and I'm going to continue to interview more companies over the next couple of weeks, that BCM and continuity is very siloed. In fact, if I was to draw this slide myself, I would have another couple of inches distance between engineering operations and continuity, right? So, and then, and we'll go back to sort of the original sort of DevOps caricature. This is actually created by Andrew, people don't know, Andrew Clay Schaefer gave a presentation at Velocity 2009. That was the famous conference where John Osbar gave his 10 deploys a day at Flickr, right? But Andrew's wasn't videotaped, so most people don't know it. But he actually created this slide, and it was brilliant about this idea of a wall of confusion and between sort of developers and operators. And it was about organizations not collaborating, having blameful, this whole idea of over the wall notion is a metaphor. And hey, here, install this. Hey, it didn't work, fix it, right? Without really. And so DevOps was really sort of, a real attempt to break down that wall. And then over time, it became more of a metaphor for just sort of anybody to anybody in the organization, dev, security, though we do have DevSecOps, but the point is that, in general, DevOps is this metaphor for just collaboration, communication. And one of the other interesting things is over the last 10 years, been some great, really over the last probably 7 years, or 6 years actually, there's been some incredible research by a lot of different organizations. One of the ones of note came out of Gene Kim's IT Revolution publishing organization. They created something called DORA, the State of DevOps. And here's the thing, right? Like the numbers vary, but what basically the research has told us, so we kind of know what practitioners empirically, these things. Academically, now it's been validated academically. Nicole Forsrum and Jez Humble actually published an academic review. So as far as anybody, that's really credible add on to what, just general sort of the research, and then it just industrialized, right? And what it's saying is that there are certain practices and behavior patterns in combination that allow us to sort of get it all, have our cake and eat it too, right? Like, in other words, we can be fast and more resilient in safety. And in fact, some of the data over the years have showed, the numbers varied. I think I forget what year this was, but the numbers vary over the years. I would say that organizations in general that have these certain patterns of technology and behavior patterns, and I'll go over those in a minute, tend to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 100, sometimes 1,000 times more, more faster, if you will, delivery lead time. And then sometimes 100 times more resilient than people who don't, or organizations that don't have these sort of behavior patterns, right? And like the data is showing that consistently over and over and over again. So, and what that really sort of gets us to is this idea of breaking the classic project management golden triangle, right? The original was like you can have sort of speed, resilience, and cost. You have to pick two. And the actual original DevOps sort of core chronic conflict was speed versus resilience, right? Like, developers want to differentiate, operations want to create scale and resilience, right? And it was a conflict, right? And so, but the research has told us, and actually the evidence of, people, myself, and, hundreds and maybe thousands of people who have been practitioners of DevOps will tell you that if you have this sort of generative behavior, you get sort of the speed and resilience built in. And so Ron Westrom had this, he was a sociologist and really didn't even work in IT. He basically did sort of patient care or whatever. And he created this sort of topology of sort of organizational behaviors. And And one of the categories he classified as generative, and these are sort of high cooperation, where messengers are trained, risk is shared, bridging occurred, failure leads to inquiry, like what happened, instead of like, hey, you're fired, and novelty. So hey, I've got an idea. And so if you think about this, going back to sort of this meta crisis right now, right? And you compare that to sort of a pathological with low cooperation, messenger shot, responsibility shirked, bridging discouraged, failure leads to scapegoat, and now new ideas is sort of crushed. The problem right now is that, like, abnormal is the new normal. The chains of process are completely broken. So even your best business continuity plans, like, just there's no way they accounted for this. I would love to see somebody that, as I go through this, says our business plan has accounted for all these examples that I'm about to cover in this presentation. So if you have not sort of cultivated a generative culture, you're going to have people that are going to be, out in the sort of edges, sort of afraid to make decisions that have to be made. I mean, we go on and on, right? So and we'll see, that like, for example, in the case study I'm going to talk about later, you take this new CARE, the $2 trillion package, right? It has I think 350 billion or something for SBA loan provisions. From what I understand, the requirements for that didn't even come out to the beginning of last week, like what banks had to do to support this. And they literally had 3 days to be able to put this up as a storefront to onboard, right? And, it's just crazy, right? Like, imagine the disruption of doing that, just to be able to do that. You could not do that with a pathological bureaucratic. You just can't do it. No way. Absolutely not. Even the too big to fail folk like JPMC said, like, nope, sorry, we can't do it. My case study bank was a top 10 bank, actually did it. B of A actually said, here's what we're going to do. We're only going to give SBA loans to existing customers, right? So it was pretty clever, actually. And here's what's happening, right? Like, if you're a small business and you've got some smaller bank and they're basically not nimble and they're taking 2 weeks to get VMs and they haven't gotten to containers, and not that containers are end all be all, I'm just saying example, because containers are not, can't run in a bank, right? All these things you can't do in a bank. Well, guess what? You have to do them now. And if you're one of those customers, you're probably going to lose them to somebody like B of A.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Back here at TechStrong TV studio. Hope you enjoyed part one of John's DevOps and business continuity. John always has such great insight into this stuff. Let's go back now and listen to part two of John Willis.
So there's been this long-standing thing called COMS. It was originally CAMS. Actually, Damon Edge and myself kind of coined CAMS, and Jez Hummel added the lean. And so I'll walk through this quickly. Again, this sort of model has really influenced organizations over the last 10 years. Culture, which is really about behavior, people over process, freedom to fail, very much sort of in line with the sort of Ron Westrom generative culture, learning from failure, ideas from anybody. Moving away, what I call this in general is a distributed trust model. That allow people to sort of make the changes, give them the trust that they know what they're changing in code, configuration, and less about some advisory board on a Wednesday that has to deem from on high. And I'm not trivialize the complexity of change advisory boards in an organization, right? I spend a lot of time in big banks helping them decipher this, and it's not easy. My only meta point right now is a meta crisis. This is not the way to operate. Like, you might have had the ability to do that and get away with it, But if you've got to deliver services in 3 days, you need your people to have trust. They have to have the sort of the non-fear motivation to do things and not worry about getting fired if they make a mistake. Again and again, this idea of sort of empowering or creating distributed trust models, allowing people sort of, hey, raise your hand. Because that's the other thing. You don't want an outage right now. I'm not saying you can prevent outages. I'm just saying if some junior person that's working from home in podunk nowhere, if their ability to raise their hand to stop a delivery, right, like it could save you a massive outage, as opposed to like, I'm not going to say anything about that. We got 100 people working on it for 3 days, and like I'm not going to be the one that's going to go ahead and break that. Well, and then sort of automation, right? Automate everything, right? This has been what companies have been doing very well. Some companies have been doing very well, right? Your sort of infrastructure as code, configuration as code, your Chef, Puppet, Ansibles, continuous integration, CI/CD, and then again, like I said earlier, this is not a time where you want to be like have these new government requirements or new sort of supply chain requirements or insurance or just on and on, where you have to deliver things instantaneously or you lose your customer, where it takes you three weeks or a month to get infrastructure. You will lose your customers. So heavy usage on CI/CD, cloud. Again, a lot of usage of containers, clusters like Kubernetes, OpenShift. And then some of the new ideas around security, software-defined networking. Again, network's taking it on the chin right now, big time, right? So if you've put some sort of investment in software-defined or automation around a network, it's paying like exponential dividends right now. I've been working a lot on something called automated governance, policies code. A little later in this presentation, I'll get to how the adversaries are on steroids right now. They're finding opportunity. They were already pretty daunting pre-mega crisis. Now they're finding incredible cracks in our our security posture, right? And then the lean, just not to go too far here, but like in a lot of conversations, and I've done a lot of presentations on this, but let's just to say is that organizations that have really focused on sort of waste and flow and understand the balance of waste and flow, lean value stream mapping, a lot of sort of structures that we've learned come very well from sort of Toyota production systems and lean leverage operations management principles. And then measurement, of course, right? So there's a new buzzword today is observability. It's a new greatest thing. Again, there's things that have buzzwords that are sort of half good and half like buzzwords. But it comes from control theory, and without a complex discussion, let's say it's a superset of all the things we would think about from telemetry, logs, events, and it's also sort of this additive. It's an outside looking in, right? But you need this now. You need the ability to be able to see patterns much quickly. Again, there's these new workflow patterns, there's new network patterns, there's new attack vectors. And so you really have to be, so you can't be just in a classic 1990s sort of event, the monitor shows the same screen all the time. Like that, you're just not going to get it done here, during, and really, the point is these companies have invested in this, not even preparing for meta crisis, because it's the more efficient, back to the high performance organizations I mentioned earlier. It's just the right way to run. And in distributed tracing, things like Zipkin and Jaeger, these are the defaults for sort of Kubernetes service mesh, Istio. Again, you get a lot of, excuse me, sorry about that. You get a lot of mileage out of these things for, again, sort of understanding how sort of application flow works. I talked about a little bit about, sort of metrics, the sort of high performance, the research, but, and this isn't the end all be all, but, there's sort of what I call the magic 4: lead time, deployment frequency, change success rate, and time to restore, right? Like now's a really good time to have a handle on that kind of stuff and be looking at different service delivery services and try to understand which are the ones that are lagging, which ones are leading. And, again, all this leads into sort of understanding service node disruptions and flow. And a lot of people have moved into even sort of service mesh in the enterprise. It's still early in my opinion, but it sort of promotes all these sort of things like distributed tracing and observability sort of built into the service mesh, back to the point where the developers in general They sort of get it for free. It's a lot easier. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time. And then finally, sort of in the sort of comms model, you end with sharing, and this is about sort of inter-organization. Get back to sort of Red Hat. Jim Weishurst's book, Open Organization. It really, we sort of do head to toe in Red Hat Open. But the reason why this is important, if you think about, one of the things I'd never understood is large organizations having closed, source repos within the organization. Like this development team can't see that. And in some certain secure, very secure environments, obviously that makes sense. But in general, companies just do it as a blanket, pattern. Like think about the scenario again, where they're now developers that can't walk up down the hall. They can't find somebody who's in a cube. They can't find, sort of the Brent, if you will, to say, hey, I know somebody's written some software to do this. So then they have to sort of, and they can't see again, I think you get the point. The companies that have sort of opened up their repos and have, strong intra-organization sort of sharing are just like moving a pace away from the organizations that haven't. And again, the key point right now is, more than ever, it's very easy to lose a customer right now. There's this interesting discussion going on about Airbnb. Will it actually survive? And I know it's not an enterprise story, but like their sort of shadow banking model, the way they sort of work, and their sort of run rate. Again, I won't go too far, but like, there's some people they could be out of business this year, right? Again, everything's on the line right now. I'm like, it's just never been more important to be good at this stuff, right? Being able to basically communicate with a bank, talking to a bank, I'm glad that's actually happening in my sort of 40 years in this industry, actually watching banks actually sit down with other banks and sort of share practices. I mean, it's really awesome. And then there are definitely sort of long conversations about sort of new silos being sort of integrated into this DevOps discussion, cyber security, DevSecOps, great models there. Again, I have a lot of presentations on this. So we're a little bit, on the curve, not ahead of the curve here. But again, with all this sort of activity from adversaries and attackers, the people who have really sort of matured their DevOps, if you will, are easily and faster, or even people who invest in sort of a DevSecOps model, like putting sort of security in every part of the supply chain, looking at automated governance, policy code, those kind of things, are just getting a hand up on these sort of these new attack vectors that have been created by this meta crisis of COVID-19, being nimble. ITIL a little bit different. Unfortunately, I don't think there's been really great movement, but there has been some, and so I think it's still a little back office. There's still, I know ITIL 4 is better, has been better. There's been some good movement, so I applaud that, and I've been involved in some of this movement in large banks, but I applaud that the industry is at least sort of looking at sort of DevOps and service management, and because a lot of the ITIL is sort of baked into the sort of back office 1990s notion of how everything sort of fits together, and I think we're sort of crawling out of that, which is positive, right? So Jane Grohl, she's been a service management expert, trainer, certifier. She's also been involved in DevOps from the early days. I met her at the first DevOps days. She has a great presentation at DevOps Enterprise Summit 18, where she shows out just the whole presentation is a great sort of comparison of service management and DevOps. But this sort of one chart I really love, like for example, a CI to DevOps is a is continuous integration. A CI to sort of the idle people is a configuration item in a CMDB. So you can have an organization using the same words, actually maybe in the same meeting, and not realizing they're talking about a completely different thing. And so this chart shows some of the other things, like how incidents are sort of understood in DevOps versus ITIL, tickets or incident management and sort of DevOps and generally in SRE is more about sort of resolution, whereas ITIL, it's really about sort of audit. And I know that could be a little disrespectful, but the point is very few organizations sort of do both of those really well. And so what we have then is, I like to use the tortoise and the hare example of this sort of mismatch, impedance mismatch. running at two different speeds. Sort of DevOps and sort of all the things in modernization, cloud native, all these things are moving at a different speed than sort of what this back office sort of service management teams are doing. And, in a lot of cases, they don't really even realize that they're have this impedance mismatch speed. I always joke that the ITIL people on the 29th floor, the DevOps people on the 32nd floor, they use different elevators, different lunch cafeterias, never talk, but they do use the same overlapping terminology. And here again, now's the time to sort of break these silos, because the overlap of sort of DevOps, ITIL, so if you did the sort of Venn diagram of the, sort of DevOps, ITIL, and BCM, right, you'd find some interesting, like what those circles look like in organization A versus B versus C would be very interesting. And so this leads us to business continuity, and I wanted to, again, this isn't sort of an indictment of business continuity, although it will sound that way, but my experience of what's happening now, even myself, as somebody who's been, somebody who's really started to study DevOps and try to move the ball forward, I haven't really sort of stood up, on a stage and said, hey, how come we're not inviting the continuity people to the DevOps meetups, so like I'm as guilty as anybody else. So this is what I've sort of over my career, and then more recently in some of this sort of meta crisis discussion. So again, I would say that we've got that same sort of impedance mismatch here, like ITIL and DevOps in BCM. But I think the probably more important takeaway of this is I do think a lot of sort of business continuity discussions are sort of 1990s based. Again, if you're not great, then you're excluded from my opinion here. But in my experience, most are. Like ITIL, but the difference is I don't see a whole lot of sort of open conversation about parallel initiatives or open dialogue between sort of the board, the business continuity boards, and sort of what's going on in sort of modernization and DevOps efforts. I think they're not talking that. So I think they're I think they're on the 38th floor, using different outlets.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind Devops.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Okay, John's really laying it out here, huh? After part two. If you have any questions or comments for John, as I mentioned earlier in the show, join our Slack channel at techstrongtv.slack.com. If you go to TechStrong TV, actually, techstrong.tv, you can grab an email, or just enter your email, you'll get an invite into the Slack. And if you have any questions or comments for John on it, it's a great way to reach him with it. So please feel free to go to techstrong.tv, enter your email, and get your Slack invite. But for now, let's head over for the wrap-up of John's DevOps and business continuity presentation.
So if we look at, this is actually taken from a large commerce, a retailer that like everybody listen here has heard of. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but this is right out of their plan. And if you look at the scope, right, like it's disaster recovery, it's crisis management, crisis communication, emergency response, and these are all important, right? Like your building's on fire, or your transformer or your electricity pod blow up, right, which happens. Like having this plan is really, really important, right? But what's more important right now is like this crisis is actually has exposed these fault lines that were not all these things are actually sort of in context right now. If you look at like these four in general, and no disrespect to experts who do this on a daily basis, but these four, I would say, are mostly motivated around minimizing the impact and focusing to getting back to a well-known state in the shortest amount of time. right? And when we look at this meta crisis with COVID-19, this is not your normal discontinuity event, right? This is it's sort of everything, everybody remote, everybody for who knows how long. I mean, it's just the dynamics of this is sort of, again, something I've not seen in my sort of 60 years, but certainly 40 years as a practitioner. And if you look at sort of this same plan's objectives, right, safety and well-being of employees, right? Yes, incredibly important if the building's on fire or chemical spill or, but it doesn't address psychological safety, right? So burnout has always been a thing in our industry. I've given numerous presentations on this, but now we're sort of in a steroid mode where people are really, not only is your sort of family, your health, your spouse, your kids, I mean, you're worrying about, I've been quarantined for 4 weeks. I'm 60 and I'm in this one of those risk categories. Like there's a lot of stress going on for everybody. And we're sort of compounding that with, asking our sort of employees to do heroic feats and, and these sort of 3-day business things that have to be run because, what's going on. The other thing is, so the notion of get sort of critical functions back as soon as possible. Okay? There's not really an as soon as possible plan or sort of ability outcome here as we stand. We don't know when, like it could be another 2 weeks, it could be another 2 months, it could be the rest of the year that we're in this sort of new mode of operation, this new normal, right? So, and then even the notion of critical functions, right? Like, are we going to be down for 6 months, 12 months? And in an API economy, and when you talk about sort of microservices and all those things, it's less likely to even be able to sort of define what critical functions are. We live in a sort of everything to everything confidence. In command and control structures, even pre-meta crisis, people were, people I interview in large companies, like, I don't know what managers doing. I don't know what their roadmap is. It seems they change it all the time. Well, imagine how stressed they are right now and the low level of confidence when they don't even know where the meetings are. And, executives are having these crazy meetings because they don't know how to fix things. And they're sort of spending more time in trying to understand the broken continuity than they are explaining to, because they have been in a pathological, structure, and they're not likely to sort of do that sort of generative communication and open transparency, right? On and on and on. There's no sort of minimal amount of services, right? So again, this idea of, getting critical functions up for the shortest amount of time, and there's a notion of what they call a recovery point objective or an RPO time, right? Like this kind of, what is the, how do you, there is no, I can't imagine that I could find a business plan. Now, there probably are some type of industries that have dealt with pandemics, but even sort of like, I don't think your worst case pandemics, and we didn't have IT back in, the Spanish flu, even your sort of worst case, I can't imagine that people who are anywhere close to their RPOs being in line with where they're at right now. And then, this notion of shelter in place, right? So if you look at a classic BCM plan, there's typically a shelter in place. And it's very much based on sort of campus or region or country. It's more about like, how do we get people evacuated? Can we get them all up in a hotel for a week? Is this a snowstorm? Did the building catch on fire? Building systems, what do we got to do to sort of make the building safe to come back to? Relocation again, are we putting people up? So our classic DR modes have been, sort of this snowstorm and everybody hunkers up in a hotel that's right next to the campus where people actually sleep at the office, right? Well, that's not happening now. Everybody's remote, and we're all remote for now, forever. So all this, and then the other thing that's interesting about sort of the shelter in place, but BCM in general, is if you look at this sort of COVID-19, it's been this interesting set of waves. So you dealt with the China portion first, if you had sort of supply chain there, and then you had Europe, and if you weren't paying attention, which most people weren't, you got hit because you were in a hot spot, right? And now everybody realizes that we're here. But I mean, I was scheduled to speak basically 4 weeks ago at one of the large insurance companies in internal DevOps days, and they didn't decide till the day before I'd flown into the city the day before, like 2 p.m. in the afternoon for the next morning, I'm doing the keynote for internal DevOps days. They send me at 2 p.m. an email that they've canceled the event. So really, and that was basically a decision they had made, basically within probably a day, that they weren't going to allow any non-essential and certainly no vendors on their campus, right? That wasn't in their BCM. So what are the opportunities, right? I talked about this earlier, like, all right, DevOps is great, BCM sucks. No, of course not, right? Like, we all have not done a great job here. And so what have we learned? What can we come out of this? And so one of the things I focused on here is, like, I'm not going to try to boil the ocean because I don't do sort of BCM as my day job. Two, this presentation is already long as it stands as it is. So I looked at sort of like, what are the areas that sort of where I can create a reasonable conversation with sort of DevOps, and DevOps being the umbrella for modernization, right? So employees, supply chain, and customers, right? Pretty straightforward, right? Everybody's got them. So if we look at the impact on employees, right? Like, I don't want to over-rotate on the remote, but there's some subtle things, like everybody's talking about like how you do a remote and remote. You're like, okay, yes, let other people describe that. But we are remote, everyone, all the time right now so we get the memo. And then there are some interesting sort of impact areas, right? For example, a lot of sort of large corporations, there's lots of people in sort of IT, incident teams, call center, IT administration, secretaries, mainframe support, whatever, that have never really worked from home more than, say, a weekend or a couple of nights. And a lot of people don't have an extra room. So they're setting up their office in their kitchen and dining room. Your kids are home. They're crawling all over the place, right? So most people will work, not used to this everyone remote all the time. They're just like sort of do this for a couple of days and get back, or I'm sick and I'm going to work from home, or there's a snowstorm. Disruptive workload norms, right? Like, I mean, right now it's just something. So if you're a sort of command and control structure and you sort of like, or sort of, hopefully nobody listening here is sort of doing a time clock for their employees, but like, just short of that, beware that your employee might have to lose 3 hours to go to the grocery store. Their spouse might have rotating, might be in a service, healthcare or something like that, or firemen or policemen, and their sort of shifts are all over, but compounded with the fact that your kids are home. So you better have adaptive capacity and the ability to be resilient, to be able to deal with abnormal workflows in terms of your sort of Kanban boards, your storyboards, or project management boards. Like, they're all over the board. Sorry, terrible pun. Networking, it's not just VPNs, right? Like, yes, we can go on about VPN stories, and there's some hilarious stories about, Grubhub breaking down Facebook, but and it's an interesting thing, but like, just think about people who've never really worked from home, who now have to actually set up VPNs in their home network and are not real savvy because they've really just not done a lot of stuff there because they've traditionally gone to their sort of desktop at work. Just a help desk volume call. And guess what? The help desk is overstressed anyway. They're working on all these sort of 3-day applications and they don't really have time for stupid like home networking questions. And I've talked about burnouts. Like, our employees in organizations are taking on heroic feats right now, right? It's a testament to our industry. It's a testament to how people, there are people trying to, like, again, Red Hat, some of our competitors, like I heard Oracle, all these companies are sort of getting in the limelight, but they are actually doing altruistic software development to help do things like help supply chains for masks and respirators. And like, we're really sort of showing up as a, I don't want to get too sort of do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag right now, but like I'm really impressed with the way we're behaving, and like the conversations I'm having with sort of certain companies, just listening to them talk about their employees. And in fact, one of the interesting things that I've heard is, like, if you're really good at adaptive capacity and you've really sort of had the memory muscle around these sort of DevOps things, you've gotten really good on the behavior, general culture. I'm finding that these companies are actually throttling back to old anti-DevOps patterns, like change advisory for work and stopping, you have to get approval for work. And they're like, oh my God, that's horrible. No, they're doing it for the health and the psychological health and safety of their employees due to burnout. So imagine like you're so good at this that not only have you spent 3 years getting memory muscle on having a generative culture, but you're adaptive enough to change that to the original pattern, the anti-pattern of DevOps, because you see the result. Like that's actually sort of adaptive capacity and resilience. Supply chains, right? Again, on and on about hardware, software upgrades, physical stuff, onboarding for employees. Like you can't, like literally, companies can't hire because they can't onboard. The vulnerabilities of suppliers and suppliers. Zoom, like listen, just follow the Zoom story right now. You know, it's been the new great tool for everybody. In fact, I'm using it right now to record, but like, and I'm probably getting attacked as well. But like, if you've been following the vulnerabilities that are there and their ability to adapt to scale, and even Cisco WebEx and GoToMeeting, like they're all having these incredible bandwidth issues right now. Again, did we account for, and then so like people like UCM, right, to the ability for all your companies actually now all have to do all meetings remote. Like, did you have the capacity for that? Does your supplier have the capacity for that? We talked about network impact. And then on the customers, right, there's all sorts of demands and ebb and flows and increased scale, decreased scale. Brick and mortar is sort of down, but online is up. And, insurance, commerce, new flows, new service, and then all these sort of new things that are popping out because regulatory demands or new supply chain demands or just general, your business is having to adapt, is pushing the sort of old backlog. So your marketing plans are disrupted. Your organizations are still waterfall and non-agile are just getting completely crushed right now. So again, so just to sort of follow the thread, and not that I'm sort of purposely dumping on BCM all the time, but were your BCM sort of business continuity plans, business continuity management, but your BCM plans staying in line with the day-to-day changes and improvements and things that were going on with modernization, DevOps, and all that? And the answer is, for the most part, no. Right? So now they're just completely sort of decoupled. And I had a friend of mine, so incident management, another friend who works for a large institution said, John, God forbid if we had a major outage right now, right? I mean, again, these people are having to sort of do all these things, and then you said this sort of user is the product, right? Like that still exists. Somebody, just because you've got all your employees working around, your VPNs are overloaded, everything's overloaded, you're sort of backlogged, everybody's working, 60-hour weeks. The person hits enter on your website is just not going to tolerate it not working, and they're going to find somebody who does, right? Sort of closing this down, one of the things that, when I got Red Hat, I got to share in a lot of sort of other really smart people thinking about things. There's a great slide that's used about the sort of open organization, sort of there's the conventional wisdom model of the, the sort of top down, you sort of command and control. It sort of flows down the title, and it's basically sort of where the assumption is everybody who works in an organization is extrinsically motivated, right? Money or promotion or pay. Whereas the sort of open organization is really sort of a flip pyramid where you catalyze sort of decision making, you promote the sort of let the sparks fly idea, purpose and passion, engagement. So you're sort of driving sort of from bottom up as opposed to top down. Setting direction, motivating, and in general, just getting things done, right? This is a lot about what DevOps is and generative cultures and all that, right? And then Andrew Clay Schaefer created this I'm pretty sure he created it, was a really sort of spin-off on that. He did it for Cloud Native purposes presentation. I put DevOps there on the right. But if you think about traditional sort of how things are delivered, they're sort of anchored. They're sort of, the architectures are very sort of, you can't use that, don't do this, you do this. Brittle deployments in general because of that. Ops is your classic ops, toil driven. And then as opposed to sort of the DevOps, or what he originally, just so Andrew doesn't get mad at me, it said cloud native model is, unchained differentiated value, right? A responsive innovation platform. Again, talk about platform, it's a big deal, right? And so new tools, new behaviors, new possibilities. So finally, I wanted to go into the case study. And so this large bank had invested very heavily into this sort of this three-pillar idea they had, which is locality, simplicity, reliability, resilience, and psychological safety. And so I want to tell you a story, and this is the bank that basically was able to deliver service in 3 days, right? So locality and simplicity is about sort of definitely platforms. I mean, again, we happen to make one called OpenShift. It's, sort of a Kubernetes, but like it's the only way to roll right now. Like, I mean, platform as a service. We call it platform as interface. I'll be talking more about that with my team in sort of next week and the week after on this show, if you will. But making things simple for developers, not having developers have to track down networking and storage, and so the platform has to be the new normal. Remove the friction. Containers, right? It's again, there's the cliche that containers solve everything, but then there's this sort of truth that containers actually can create a nimble model for delivery. This whole GitOps and GitFlow model, right? Like it's sort of been around for infrastructure code, but like I like this idea of operations by pull request. So again, imagine that you have like a lot of people who have never all been remote at the same time. They can't actually sort of swarm around a war room or right? Just think about all the stuff when people are on site, the things that you do, right? Look, the interesting most thing in most corporations right now, I would say if you can solve this, is the scheduling system for Office, for meeting rooms. Right? Just imagine now that companies where you can never get a meeting room, now nobody can get a meeting room, at least physical, and they have to do sort of virtual. I mean, it changes so many dynamics on the way everything works. So the ability for people to have the thing to sort of control their destiny, locality, the simplicity, not having to go look for somebody. Being able to services that have been thoughtfully decoupled over time so that if I'm delivering something, I don't have to go 2 steps and wait for somebody else to deliver and then they tell me and come back, right? And then all the things like CI/CD, Devops Dojo. This company has invested heavily in Devops Dojo. It is incredibly paying dividends in how they sort of scaled people to sort of get to this, agreed notion of the 3 pillars. Reliability and resilience. We talked about observability, traceability, distributed tracing, all those things, but also, they're actually using sort of service mesh capabilities like circuit breaker patterns and chaos engineering. They're heavily invested in APM, application performance management stuff, like all these things. And then you add the psychological safety, which, this whole notion. So they've actually, I think I mentioned the book by Sidney Dekker, Just Culture. Just Culture is an interesting way of thinking about, originally designed around sort of safety and aviation and patient care. But a lot of people are using in IT, and this idea that Just Culture is sort of systems thinking. You don't sort of immediately blame the person. It's, and I don't do it justice right now, but this organization gave like 600 or 700 people in the service delivery department and said, read this. And everybody sort of understands this blameless system thinking, like magic of that. And again, it's paying off dividends in the example, like all these things have come to fruition in that they literally delivered, probably one of the few banks that actually hit the April 4th deadline. And if you look at, like I said, the April 1st, again, I'm just going by what I was told. I didn't write an application. There was a 30-day sort of CARE Act SBA requirement document. The requirement was to have it on April 4th. This particular bank did. And the person who actually was telling me this story actually worked on a private bank who told me the Dodd-Frank Act took 2 years. Right? So, and the other thing too, is like there's this sort of fear that every time they wanted to sort of afternoon press releases come up, that the president or the coronavirus task force might say something new, and the banks will be like, okay, everybody, we got to start working on this tonight. I mean, like that's a real fear. I mean, we know that the next wave of the CARE Act is coming, soon. So it's just closing it down. What can we learn? Again, I don't want to sound callous to what is going on right now. I actually have friends that died. I am scared to death. I'm 61. I'm overweight. I mean, who cares, right? But so I've been quarantined for weeks. My family has just been completely disrupted by this, and I know there's been pain and suffering economically for people and everything. So I want to be really clear about when I talk about like how do we sort of think about this as IT professionals versus sort of the personal. So I want to say that, the Winston Churchill is never let a good crisis go to waste. Again, I don't want to sound unsympathetic to what's going on, but I do want to say, as professionals in this industry, like this is when we shine. This is where we sort of get it. We go like, and so I do think right now is, my advice to almost everyone I'm talking about, like, let's show to those who've been doing these sort of transformation or DevOps or modernization things for the last 10 years. Now's the time to show what we really can do. Like that top 10 bank, right? Like that, like you can't imagine how like the CEO level, the board, the regulators was so impressed. Like I always thought they were doing good stuff, but my goodness, I had no idea. So now's a great time, right? And anyway, I'd love to continue this conversation. I hope I didn't bore you, and I'll be back next Tuesday and with something else, probably more of a conversation piece with some of my GTO team. Well, thank you so much.
Devops.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. Devops.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. Devops.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. Devops.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, and we're back on TechStrong TV on the Digital Anarchist Network. Hope you enjoyed that presentation from John. We did break it into 3 parts because it was long, but it was well worth the watch. And again, any questions, join our Slack channel at techstrongtv.slack.com. If you go to techstrong.tv, you can fill in your email address and get an invitation to the channel. That being said, let's now hit some of the news headlines for today, Tuesday, April 7th. I want to highlight Security Boulevard first. Again, on Security Boulevard, since this whole thing with coronavirus and COVID started, for whatever reason, Security Boulevard has just been getting a ton of hits, a ton of viewers, new viewers, old viewers. A lot of it's actually is around Zoom and Zoom security issues and everything. And, let me just say from the outset, I don't think Zoom saw this coming. And, sometimes you in order to make steel, you gotta be put through fire. And Zoom, the whole Zoom organization is getting a quick lesson and growing up fast. But I still think it's a great platform. There are other alternatives, though, and I'd encourage you to look at those as well. Though, if you're comfortable with Zoom, they recently implemented some new security features. You can take a look at it. But a couple things here for not Zoom related. Feel free to look at the Zoom articles on Security Boulevard. But we're seeing, as I said last week, another pandemic of the cybersecurity sort around COVID, and that's bad guys trying to take advantage of the situation. So we are now also seeing an increase in what we call small DDoS attacks that are really aimed at taking down VPNs. Many of us are working remotely and using VPN to try to remain secure as we access our organization's assets. So there's this new, what we call small DDoS, which are trying to take down these VPNs. And then secondly, the ransomware people, they're nothing if not relentless and innovative. Now their thing is not enough that they just encrypt all of your assets, they're also threatening to disclose any private information. you may be storing personally identifiable information, confidential trade secrets, etc. And even beyond that, if you don't pay the ransom, they're publishing people or organizations that didn't pay the ransom and backed up instead off of their resources so that they can try to shame you into paying the ransom. I don't know. I would consider it a badge of honor. I think that I was able to back up off my resources rather than pay ransomware money. But whatever, it is what it is. The ransomware, ransomware is a very profitable business, a little bit at a time, and it's not going anywhere, unfortunately. And the only thing to do is be vigilant, especially from phishing and spear phishing attacks. But do read the article. It'll give you a good background on that. Out on Container Journal, we've got some news from the I can never pronounce their name. The folks behind Ubuntu, Canonical. They're rolling out a managed apps for Kubernetes, and you can get all the details on that on Container Journal. The Ubuntu folks are really becoming, all in on Kubernetes here as we see that. And then I wanted to just highlight on Devops.com, we have a good article on universal code search. This is a area I first became aware of. I met the CEO of a company, open source company. I think it was in DevOps world, perhaps in Lisbon. And really, it makes life so much easier for developers to be able to just search and find a snippet of code that they're looking for that maybe they've written, and hone in on that, copy it, paste it, correct it, do what they have to. And then lastly, I've said this with DevSecOps. As we've shifted left with DevSecOps, there's also been sort of a rebound where we realized we had to shift right as well, right? We had to worry about things to the right of the deployment arc or point. And now we're also seeing that with testing in general. So we're seeing a test right in testing, or excuse me, a shift right in testing. And it makes sense, you know what? Because at the end of the day, the DevSecOps and testing sort of shift left paradigm, if you're shifting right in DevSecOps, you're probably going to shift right in testing as well. I think they're becoming closer and closer connected. So another good article on Devops.com. You know what? That just barely scratches the surface, folks. There's probably 50 new articles every day on Security Boulevard for you to check out. Container Journal has 1 or 2. Devops.com has 3 or 4. And that's every single day, Monday to Friday. So go check them out. And, I will have more tomorrow. I mean, and by the way, we get a lot of people wanting to submit articles to us on these sites. We do take submissions, bylined articles, but there's a couple things. We're not looking for do-follow links. We're not looking for marketing messaging. We're looking for vendor-neutral, original content that's interesting to you and our audience. So if you did want to write or submit an article, we do accept submissions. But keep those guidelines in mind, and we're not going to put in do-follow links and so forth. Anyway, that wraps up the news today for Tuesday. Next, I want to turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. Charlene has a Zoom interview with Chip Childers, who's the new executive director for Cloud Foundry Foundation. And I'm interested to hear what Chip's vision is for Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry, sort of a sister organization, is a sister organization to CNCF, and it'll be interesting to see what's Chip's vision for the Cloud Foundry Foundation going forward as a separate entity, or maybe not. Anyway, we'll turn it over to Charlene now with Chip Childers.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, everybody. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I am here today with Chip Childers, who is the new Executive Director for the Cloud Foundry Foundation. Chip, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time and talking with me today.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Great. Well, first of all, congratulations on your new title.
Yeah, thanks. We as an organization and as a community are super excited for Abby Kearns, who I've replaced as executive director of the foundation. She's got a great opportunity ahead of her. She'll announce that in kind of the coming days. But yeah, it's a really exciting time for the Cloud Foundry community. We've got a clear vision for what the future of the platform is going to be. The whole ecosystem's lined up behind it, and we just think it's going to be a lot of fun to progress through the year.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Cloud Foundry Foundation. And I know there's probably maybe 5 people out there that have no idea what it is. So why don't we actually start by you just telling us a little bit about the Cloud Foundry Foundation, what you guys are all about.
Absolutely. So we're a nonprofit organization who has a sole focus on supporting the community and ecosystem around one of the world's largest open source projects, which is the Cloud Foundry platform. The Cloud Foundry platform is designed as a way to help organizations enable developers to focus on just writing the software that helps with business problems, right? Whether that's responding to a new feature request or whether that's rolling out, brand new website or API front end for partner interaction. That's what our community helps build. We build this environment that enterprise developers can be super efficient in. We're a kind of a sister organization to a bunch of other open source foundations, like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is the home to a kind of a broad collection of components that you can use to build platforms like what we build. We're all housed within the larger Linux Foundation, so we're again kind of all on very similar missions. But our community, the community that we help steward, and the commercial ecosystem around us, is very, very focused on that enterprise developer efficiency basic problem, right? How do we make developers super efficient? The project started originally at VMware, and at the time it was a product of VMware. When they created Pivotal software, they moved that project to Pivotal, and then Pivotal then donated the project and continued to participate in it along with IBM, SAP, SUSE, a number of other companies. And we've been, as a foundation, we've existed now for a little bit over 5 years. And in that time, in the last year, Pivotal itself got rolled back into VMware. So it's kind of this interesting place to be in the technology sector overall.
I can imagine. And I know, lots changed since you guys were founded. So tell me a little bit about kind of where you see the industry, where it's been and where it's going, and really what your place, what Cloud Foundry Foundation's place is going to be in that.
Yeah. So when it was originally created, Cloud Foundry was really meant to be, it modeled itself after the Heroku platform as a service, right? It was kind of the open alternative to Heroku. More than 5 years later, we're now not necessarily just a Heroku clone. We're a very highly optimized platform for the large enterprise developers, right? So there are hundreds of thousands of developers out there that use Cloud Foundry every day to help them build apps faster and help them deploy apps and manage them more effectively. Where we fit into kind of the bigger industry space and some of the trends are that with the rise of infrastructure-centric cloud-native infrastructure platforms like Kubernetes, like Istio, which is a project that Google hosts. It's for a service mesh. We view ourselves, and our community views itself, as one that curates kind of the best components that are out there in the rest of the open source world. We build things where we need to. Ideally, there becomes another open source project somewhere that we're going to be part of that can be a more general purpose component that could be used in different ways. But we sort of curate what's out there and then fill in the gaps with our own community's code and create this tailored experience that optimizes that enterprise developer.
All right. So, you mentioned earlier CNCF and the fact that they are kind of in charge of the different components, if you will. And, one of the things that obviously on Container Journal we're talking about all the time is Kubernetes. And so I'm wondering, where do you see kind of Kubernetes fitting into your story, if it, as it were, and then, where do you see it kind of fitting in moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very straightforward. Kubernetes is kind of the next version of infrastructure, right? It's a very thoughtful API. Of course, embraces the notion that containers are very good units of application deployment and management. But it's also broadly applicable, right? It's a very horizontal solution. And if you look at some of the leaders in the Kubernetes community, they're very clear about what the intent was there, right? It was to create something that you could then build platforms using. It in and of itself isn't necessarily an application platform. So for us, it represents actually a very straightforward kind of, if you look at it like a architecture, right? Like think slideware. It's easy to draw a box around the part of our architecture and to say, this is where container orchestration lives.
Right.
And we had built something before Kubernetes was well adopted. We actually have been using container technology since before Docker existed. So there's a spot in the architecture of Cloud Foundry that represents the container orchestration and runtime layer. What Kubernetes is offering us is a way to have the energy of our community as we make this transition to bring it into the architecture, let our community then transition their energy to focus on continuing to enhance that developer experience that can ride on top of the kind of that infrastructure layer. The other thing that I think Kubernetes is bringing to the kind of the broader market is you're able to, as an IT operations person, right, as a CIO or as a director of infrastructure, it optimizes at the infrastructure level very well, right? It also provides consistency much better than the infrastructure as a service model that was kind of VM centric does between different cloud providers and then on-prem systems as well. I was involved a lot in the infrastructure as a service space for a number of years, and at the time there was a lot of conversation about how great we're going to kind of turn infrastructure into this utility compute model. But the reality was virtual machines didn't do it because you had to have different virtualization drivers in the operating system you were running. It wasn't quite efficient at that. What containers and Kubernetes being consistently deployed across all these different service providers gives us now is that we're much closer to the notion of utility-centric compute. Now, the mission of the Cloud Foundry community now is to bring that developer experience and make sure that it slides right on top of any of those Kubernetes deployments.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So now as the executive director, where do you see Cloud Foundry Foundation moving ahead in the next year and two and beyond? Yeah,
well, the wonderful thing about the working in support of an open source community is that, often our job is to kind of read tea leaves and describe what appears to be the emergent opinion of a set of very diverse constituents, whether we're talking about the individual developers working on the project, or we're talking about, their employers and the downstream commercial distributions. So unlike a company that has a product roadmap that could be very clear about, here's what we're doing in Q1, Q2, Q3. Our job is to kind of talk about trajectory, right? Talk about where we see the industry taking this project. And I'm actually really excited about it because for a number of years, out of the 5 years I've been with the foundation since its inception, our community has had to spend an enormous amount of time on the plumbing, right? The components that are under that experience, largely because either they didn't exist or they were too immature. So we've reached a point now where Kubernetes is maturing, and other capabilities like Istio that we've been integrating are similarly maturing, and they open up new possibilities for new capabilities. So we don't believe that, for example, configuring a service mesh topology in a bunch of YAML is an efficient use of an enterprise developer's time. But Istio is a super powerful way to think about networking that can be application centric, but needs a better developer experience on top of it. So our community is going to be super focused on measuring the maturity of these components, bringing them in, getting to then redirect a lot of its time and energy towards that developer-centric experience and bring new capabilities to those developers, right? Enhance networking functionality, but describing it in a way that makes sense to a developer who's maybe a Java developer, right? Who doesn't do switch configuration, right? They don't understand necessarily complex firewall topology rules, and many of the things that the service mesh is really designed to make a bit easier. We can make it even more easier for those developers.
Great. Well, Chip, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I do thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. Best of luck as Executive Director of Cloud Foundry Foundation, and I hope we can talk again very soon.
Absolutely. It's been great.
Thank you.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everyone, we're back at TechStrong TV studios. Hey, so you heard it from Chip's mouth himself. Great job, Charlene. And now, at this point in our show, it's time for our regular Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitch Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group. And as I said earlier, Mitchell has two segments today. One is on Accelerated's research on working from home and how that's changing organizations. And secondly is DevOps and Neuroscience with Accelerated Strategies Group analyst Helen Beal. So with that being said, take it away, Mitchell.
Accelerated Strategies has many areas that we're doing research on around DevOps and cloud and security. But one of the areas we also have been focusing on is the impact of COVID-19. Back on February 17th, we announced a IT preparedness survey under a health emergency. And at that time, we really weren't under any work at home type situations. It was not that long ago, but it sounds funny saying it was early on in this process. And very rapidly, things changed on the ground with what's happening with the virus and the impact to our society. So in addition to that data that we've collected, we've also pivoted and added this flash poll. You may have seen an announcement on TechStrong TV about it. So Mondays, we're going to be presenting a new flash poll survey every week, a flash poll. And then later in that week, we'll do analysis. Well, we've also done some testing prior to this, and I wanted to share some of those results with you before we talk about this week's poll. So you can actually, if you want to find the results of some prior surveys, you can go to acceleratedsurvey.com, and that will take you to a page on devops.com, which will show you the current poll and past results. The question that we asked most recently was what's the most critical employee productivity tool during COVID-19's impact to your business? And we had the things you might expect asking about. Email, things like Office 365, Google Suite, hosted mail, online meeting services, Zoom, GoToMeeting, WebEx, Google Hangouts, collaboration tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams, chat, file share type services, Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, etc. Voice, cloud-based voice services, and CRM. The results were really interesting. I would have expected maybe email to be a bit higher, but it turns out that neck and neck were online meeting services and collaboration tools. Now, they were at 37%, 36% respectively. And email came in at about 20%. So there's a fair amount of gap there, 16 points. What that tells me is that the online meeting tools, of course, now we're using that for our visual interface to each other instead of meeting into the conference room. Makes total sense. And as we use video more and more, we get comfortable with that in our homes. I think we'll see many more of our meetings being online. That may actually help even when we're back in the office to help the people that aren't in the office yet. What did surprise me a little bit was the collaboration tools, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Flock, Clip, Writer, things like that. And I'm glad to see that equal or close to equal to online meetings, because that tells me that that's where our conversations are happening, not in email, trapped in email, which I'm not a big fan of using for conversations. Matter of fact, I have the 3 reply rule. Anytime anybody on a thread is replying for the 3rd time, let's get it into a tool that encourages a dialogue, a conversation, not transactional email. So I suspect that there's a lot of collaboration happening through the collaboration tools, Slack and Microsoft Teams, because we just aren't present. And it's so much easier to stay connected when you're not on a video call or in a meeting, but you can easily reach out to somebody just like you could in the office, walking down the hall, or potentially using one of those productivity tools. I did find it interesting that file sharing and voice and CRM were as low as they were, but given everyone settling in with this new work from home situation, getting reconnected, figuring out how all of these things work, makes sense that online meetings and collaboration tools were as high as they were. So I hope you'll take this week's poll. Now, this week's poll is focused on any performance or reliability issues you may have had with the kinds of services that I talked about, as well as in-home Wi-Fi and an internet service provider. There's infrastructure now that we're dependent upon work from home. Sometimes it's a Wi-Fi that someone set up in their own house, could be also set up by a service provider. And of course, the network that all connects to, either a hybrid fiber coax or a fiber network wireless, some type of ISP provider. So I encourage you to take that poll. We'll talk about it later this week and the results of that. Again, you can get to it by going to devops.com. It'll pop up in the lower right-hand corner. You can also go to acceleratedsurvey.com. Same thing. It'll be on that page, and you can also look at prior results. Now, the great thing about these polls is when you take it, when you submit whatever your answers are, hit the submit button, you will see your results along with everyone else that's taken that poll. So it's great to get some immediate feedback. Just to give you an example, last week on the poll that we ran, we had 368 responses to it. This is before we announced it and had really been doing any promotion or talking about it. It's a pretty decent response. I think you'll enjoy at least having some comparative analysis, comparative numbers to see where others may come out on some of these questions. So I look forward to presenting more of this information to you, and I hope this has been helpful.
Devops.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. Devops.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. Devops.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. Devops.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. Today I'm here with Helen Beal, who is an analyst with Accelerated Strategies Group and a DevOps coach, really one of the leaders in the DevOps field, and many people know her and seen your talks. Welcome, Helen. Great to see you.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you from across the pond, or I guess I'm across the pond, or we both are. So always good to get on.
Yeah.
Online. So we're going to talk about neuroscience. I know that culture, neuroscience, kind of people, how they think and learn is a passion of yours. First, tell us, how did you get into that field of interest for you?
It all started with a book called Why We Love by a lady called Dr. Helen Fisher. She subsequently became a consultant to chemistry.com. And as a neuroscientist, what she did is she analysed the brains of people that are in love. And, it's a universal experience, broken hearts, good love, bad love. And, everyone wants to know more about it. And it's the most widely written about and sung about topic in the world. And I'm an English literature and language graduate, so I read a lot. Mm-hmm. I'd noticed that part before. So that's where it started. And Helen talks in the book about things like how our different brain chemicals work. So things like our cortisones and our serotonins and all of those kind of things that happen in our brain when we feel good, when we feel bad, when we're yearning for something, when we can't stop thinking about something, when we're kind of obsessed about something. She did some really important work about, what happens when we're in love and what happens when it's painful and what happens over time. Love is really crazy at the start and then it kind of fades away into something that's more kind of familiar and companionship and those kind of things. So that's where I got started. And then the next thing that really happened was quite early on in developing a DevOps business, we started doing a breakfast briefing series, and we decided on a topic for one around goals and motivation. So as you just said, like this cultural element around DevOps. And that led me to another book called Your Brain at Work by David Rock, who started the Neuro Leadership Institute. And he introduces a model in that called SCARF, where you kind of have one of 5 motivational styles. Status, certainty, autonomous, relatedness, and fairness being the SCARF model. And that kind of alerted me to the fact that this very rapidly emerging field of science, neuroscience, was starting to be applicable to the workplace. And that started me thinking about how we could use it to help all of these organizations globally that are trying to drive these significant and far-reaching change programs in their places of work.
It's interesting. I'm neither a student nor an authority on the topic, but am roughly familiar with it, generally familiar with it. One of the places I've heard about it is around innovation, things like neural diversity, getting people together who think differently and look at problems differently. It comes from different backgrounds and experiences, but it's sort of the simplistic way to describe it is you don't want to do group think, you want a diversity of how people think about things. So I have a tiny bit of experience with this in that field. Talk about how you've started to learned to apply that in a DevOps culture environment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a total hobbyist, right? I've just read a few books and talked to people about it and that sort of thing. I have no scientific training in neuroscience at all. But what I have done is use some of these learnings, and really I started to think of them in terms of what leaders are trying to do. And what leaders are trying to do is help people unlearn and then learn. So we've got, books like Barry O'Reilly's book, Unlearn, tells us, we're trying to get away from these patterns of working that we've been using for many years around waterfall and ITIL heavy processes and all of this stuff we're trying to change. So I come at it from the learning angle and how leaders can use what they know about neuroscience to help their people learn new stuff. And that uncovers some very interesting things when we start looking at things like neuroplasticity, for example. So another psychologist whose name escapes me for the moment came up with the idea of the mindset. So the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And people believe in this. So people believe they're either kind of like the person that can't really learn and they've got the skills they've got and they've got the talent they've got and that's it. And then there are other people who are kind of lifelong learners, very curious and will, try their hand at anything. And I think that sentiment that's kind of become quite pervasive in our working society. But actually what neuroplasticity teaches us is that everybody has the capacity to change their brains, and it's quite emerging in the workplace. So we didn't really know about neuroplasticity actually until fairly recently, when we started to see how people could recover from things like traumatic brain injury. And obviously that's super important, that people have had, you know, catastrophic impact on their life. But in a more subtle way, we can use it at work. So what the science is showing now is things that are really interesting, like London taxi drivers have a bigger hippocampus, which is the part of the lizard brains right at the back. So hippocampus is a Greek word for seahorse. It looks a bit like a seahorse. And that's effectively like a GPS system in our brains where our mapping occurs. And in a London taxi driver, the hippocampus is actually bigger than it is in a London bus driver. Because if you're a taxi driver in London pre-Uber, you have a strange relationship with Uber in London, but you had to do some training called the knowledge, which basically meant that you had to memorise the whole of what we call the London A to Z, which is the entire London map. So that when somebody knocked on your window and asked to go to Shepherd's Bush Road or whatever it was, you would know exactly where that was and how to get there. You didn't have to refer to anything. Whereas a bus driver is just doing a route. And they might be doing a few routes, but they're just kind of A to B. So the hippocampus is actually bigger, and we can, you know, it's a physical thing we can see. And there's lots of other examples. I often talk about squirrels. Squirrels are one of my favourite things. Squirrels' hippocampus grows and shrinks during its annual cycles. So basically during autumn, it has to collect and bury food, so nuts and things. But then it's really important that it knows where it buried them, otherwise it will starve. So during that process, it actually builds a map of where it's stored all its food, and then it survives the winter, and then in the spring that part of their brain shrinks back down. And then the scientists have found out other things, like if you play instruments, musical instruments at certain levels, you have bigger parts of your motor and other parts of your brain. If you're multilingual, you have bigger parts in other pieces. So it's very interesting. And then the kind of final point I really always make about neuroplasticity is that it's also been proven, scientifically proven, that just telling people that neuroplasticity exists actually helps them learn. It takes that anxiety, that fixed mindset philosophy away, and opens the brain up for learning.
Almost takes away that voice that can be inside of us. We tell ourselves we can't learn, so we can't. We kind of predict our own future that way.
Yes.
Talk about load in the workplace, about how cognitive load affects individuals and teams and how they work.
Yeah. So the way that we process information is in our frontal lobe, and it's a surprisingly small amount of actors that can be on the stage in our frontal lobe at any one point. There's a thing I often use in presentations where there's a list of letters. I think there's 24 letters. Can't be 24 because it's divisible by 3, which I don't think 24 is. No, 24 is. So 24 letters. And I show it to the audience, and they're in sets of 3. And then I ask them to look at it for a minute and try and remember what they're seeing. Then I switch it off and ask them to tell me what they've seen. And they manage to tell me a few of them maybe. And then I show them the same set of letters, so the same 24 letters, but this time they're arranged in recognizable chunks. So they're things like BBC, MRI, RAF, so things that we know, VAN, words or acronyms that we know. Show them that for the same length of time, switch that off, and they can remember so much more of it. And what that shows us is what I was saying about the actors on the stage, the chunks of information that we can use at any one point. So when we're asking people to learn, what we need to do is bear in mind that we do have that cognitive load. And actually another place to look for really interesting information about this is Manuel Pace and Matthew Skelton's book, Team Topologies. Matthew actually has a background in neuroscience himself as well. He has been properly trained in it, and he talks quite a lot in that book about that kind of element of cognitive load. Another part of this that gets really interesting though is when we think about things like the improvement kata, which we talk about a lot from the lean canon. We talk about it a lot in DevOps. So this idea of doing this habit of improving daily work. So setting the long-term vision or goal, looking at the current state, looking at the next target state, and then plan, do, check, act, PDCA experiment cycles between the states. Mm-hmm. What happens when we're trying to learn something new is we get there's a lot of energy in the front of our head. When we practice doing something to the point that it becomes a habit, what actually happens is we effectively automate it. We call it automaticity in neuroscience. And we have schemas. So we're all very comfortable in technology. We'll talk about schemas. So we build these schemas and we basically automate the work. So what I normally ask people when I'm talking about this is, have you ever driven home from work in the past when we used to go out to work? Have you ever driven home from work and got home and thought, I don't actually remember the drive home? And that's, you've done it so many times, you've basically automated it in your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting how those patterns happen, and also where you invoke those patterns where they don't apply. Sometimes like, why am I going here? This is not
What
where
am
I
I
meant to
doing
go.
in this room? Yes, that happens quite a lot to me.
Autopilot of life. I wonder, we're today as we're recording this podcast, we're all living with the work at home, stay at home, stay in place kind of orders. And I would guess that's also causing learning some new patterns of how people work and balancing things they wouldn't necessarily have to balance at work, like kids and, planning meals and doing calls and doing work, balancing at home life as well as at work life, but all at once, and reprogramming or kind of relearning that ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an intense time, isn't it? And it's a hugely anxious time. And I think one of the things that we all need to, as humans, be aware of is our own mental state and our friends, families, colleagues, all the humans that we know, their mental state as well. So I think there's a really big focus on wellness. And actually, there's some neuroscience here that I find really interesting. So I have one particular very, very close friend of mine that I've known for pretty much my whole life. In fact, my brother is actually with her sister. We're very close in families. And she's a bit of a hippy dippy, and obviously I adore her. She's one of my closest friends, but I'm always like, she's the hippy dippy. She goes to like meditation retreats and talks about bells and gong banging, and she's does all this meditation. And for a really long time I was really quite like dismissive, like meditation's fluffy stuff. Turns out there is some very solid neuroscience behind meditation. Again, you see evidence of neuroplasticity in people that meditate a lot. Obviously, the monks, they have a larger frontal lobe. This means that they have less anxiety because they've got more space to think about things and more mindfulness going on. So actually doing meditation, I think, in this day and age, and I try and practice it daily. It's one of the first things I do before I hit my desk in the mornings. And I've only been doing meditation for probably 1 or 2 years, maybe now, and only sort of 10 minutes, maybe a couple of times a week. But I've definitely noticed how it helps me manage stress. It helps you just take a step away from the emotions and look at them rather than just getting kind of caught up in them. So, yeah, I think that would be helpful for people. I think talking about kind of anxiety, it's probably worth talking about fear as well, and novelty and what happens neurologically there. So with fear, we have an avoidance approach. So, an avoidance response. So basically, if we're afraid of something like change, for example, what happens is our frontal lobe starts going a bit like mental, which then means that our cognitive load is reduced. So I'm sure you've experienced this where you've been trying to do something and maybe someone's been watching you and you've been finding it difficult, and then you get tense and suddenly it's like your brain just falls apart and you just can't think at all. And that's you getting cognitively overloaded because of the fear and anxiety that's going on in your head.
Almost can't function. I mean, more or less talking about having a true anxiety attack, but yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's like your head just goes, and then afterwards you're like, I'm not that stupid. Why did that happen? Why couldn't I do that thing? That's that kind of fear response. So again, just knowing that exists is so helpful. So it's like people that have panic attacks. Another really close, very long-term friend of mine was experiencing panic attacks for a while, and I said to her, I think you're having panic attacks, and she eventually went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you're having panic attacks. And actually, as soon as she knew she was having panic attacks, it immediately had, because she was no longer going, oh my God, something's awful that's happening to me, I'm going to throw up, or I'm going to fall over, I'm going to faint. She was like, that thing's happening again, just stop and breathe. So that's really helpful. The other side of that is there's an approach response. So if we like novelty, this is kind of weird, right? Because we actually don't like change, but we do like novelty. And you think that novelty is change, but it's kind of difficult to explain, but there's another really good book I would highly recommend by a lady called Britt Andrietta. And Britt's a bit more like me. She's not actually a neuroscientist by trade. She's someone that's very interested in it and reads a lot about it, and has actually written several books that she's brought together, research that she's heard about and read. And one of her books is called Wired to Resist. And in Wired to Resist, she actually explains how we are evolutionarily but we don't like change. Basically, it's an evolutionary trait. And if you think about why that might be, think about things like if you're out in Africa in the bush and you walk past a bush and it looks different from what it looked like yesterday, maybe it's got a lion in it. So your environment has changed, and that is risk that you're seeing in it. I also like to talk about bees quite a lot here as well. Bees obviously don't have a brain that looks anything like ours, but they have a thing where they fly in and out, fly in and out, fly in and out, but are very famous for if you move something outside of their hive, they will stop, go and inspect it, and then go back in, and then they'll ignore it from then on in. So, you know, we are fundamentally from the, you know, very start of evolution surviving because we recognize that change is a risk. But at the same time, we love novelty. So if you give us something new, you know, I love shopping, you know, very, very sexist, stereotypical thing to say, but, you know, women love shopping, you know, loves a new piece of clothing or something for the house or whatever. It's exciting. It gets our brain all excited. So as DevOps leaders, what we need to do is kind of balance this and understand the individual humans that we're working with, because everyone's brain is different, and understand what's going on in the human that we're trying to work with, and recognize if they're experiencing anxiety or fear when they're trying to learn, or recognize if someone's got like huge appetite for some particular new thing like Kubernetes or whatever it is that's getting them excited.
Well, you know, all the things you're talking about, I think, are so applicable to our current situation. And you know, someday, hopefully, we're not talking about staying in place and working from home and COVID-19 and all that kind of thing. But I think about, you know, everyone's going through change. And at the same time, we're all dealing with fears. Fears about health concerns, fears about economy, fears about the unknown, because we don't know what's going to happen, what the outcomes are going to look like, and what the potential impacts are to us. So one of the things that I try to promote, and I'm a big mindfulness believer also. I started doing that a few years back, and it's a great way to, you know, we as humans, or at least I do, you tend to try to think things through, to solve, to understand, to control, right? You're trying to put it all together.
Always trying to control, yeah. Always trying to grasp at something,
that's
grab
safety,
it,
right?
Safe in the ground, yeah.
I can control it, then it's not going to change on me, or I know what the outcome is going to be, or you know, you just mull those things over in your mind. And oftentimes, I kind of think about it almost, not that we're computers, but, you know, it's sort of like running too many programs on your laptop or on your computer. At some point, everything slows down and nothing works well. And that's kind of, at least I do, we as humans get to that point. And mindfulness is a great place to calm yourself. Let those things sort of exit out and slow down, and allow you to kind of get back to a new center where you can start to process and think and deal with things, and that cognitive workload is less. And just to share, you know, my thoughts on leadership, I think right now one of the key attributes for leaders is compassion, because I think it's true, it's an important thing all the time, and we don't talk enough about it, but all of us are going through different things, and all of us are going through situations and experiences that no one else truly knows what's happening. You know, I don't know what's happening at your house or in your family or in your neighborhood, or, you know, half an hour before you got on the call, or whatever it might be. And so I think in this time of not only kind of uncertainty and reprogramming of what our patterns are and our work is like and our cognitive workload, is just being extra compassionate about understanding, and maybe sometimes forgiving, even if something doesn't happen the way we would expect it to normally happen. Well, you know, not a normal situation. So I think that is, we can really practice some grace and some compassion with people, with each other, as well as people that work on our teams and in our organizations.
I totally agree. It's time for universal empathy and kindness right now are the most important thing we can do. Be united as a world to help protect everybody. Yeah.
It is. Well, let's see if we can kind of tie this back. If you were going to have some recommendations, by the way, I'm here with my puppy dog who's scratching.
Oh, hi, puppy dog.
The jingling in the backyard, in the background here. If you were going to make some recommendations of where folks might go to, some of the books or other places to learn more about neuroscience and neuroplasticity, some of these things. I think it's a great leadership skill, but I think it's also great if you're a lifelong learner and want to explore that field. What resources are available?
Just before I do that, I had a thought when you were talking a moment ago that I don't want to disappear into the ether, but okay. What you were saying, what we were talking about, is how mindfulness teaches you not to kind of like grab onto things. I think is actually such an important skill in the environments that we're trying to create. We're trying to create basically systems that manage uncertainty, right, and are hugely adaptable. So actually learning as humans to relinquish that control, to distribute authority in the case of management and leaders, to have autonomies as teams and try experiments, without certainty of what's going to happen next, is actually really important. So there are huge parallels, I think, actually, with the mindfulness movement and the DevOps movement, which are very interesting. So back to your question about resources. The books I've mentioned: Why We Love, Dr. Helen Fisher; Wired to Resist, Britt Andreatta. I mentioned David Rock's book, Your Brain at Work, and I mentioned his link, his founding of the Neuro Leadership Institute. They actually do courses. They will come and speak to organizations. I'm desperate to do one of their courses. Haven't managed to get on one yet, and obviously there's a slight problem at the moment with going anywhere. But they, I've been really impressed with what I've heard from them, and I've been on their mailing list for quite a while. So that's three books to keep you pretty busy, and a firm to watch, and a potential some learning to take advantage of. I've also followed a few courses, so I use things like in the UK, I'm not sure if it must be worldwide, but there's a thing called Future Learn, which is run by the Open University in the UK, and I've done quite a few courses through there that are free. I've done ones on ecology, on cybersecurity, and I've done one on neuroscience and learning as well. I haven't looked on Udemy yet as well, but I bet they've got probably things that would be useful. I'm doing a
lot of their courses too. Yeah,
I'm doing a data science course on that platform at the moment, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Let's wrap up by just talking a little bit about some of the work that you do as a DevOps coach with organizations around DevOps culture. What are maybe some scenarios that you step into, help people out where they might be stuck or trying to figure out how to get started or change culture, introduce, manage change? Talk about how you do that, some of the situations where you do that kind of work.
Yeah, so there's a lot of learning. As I said, it's about unlearning and learning. It's about pools of humans working together as well. So typically what I've been observing over the years that I've been doing this, and the world has moved on since I started doing this type of work. So a lot of organizations are in a different state. There aren't many organizations now where you've got 1,000 people and only one person knows about DevOps. Most organizations have made more progress than that. But typically what happens is you've got a pool of humans. Initially, one or two people start talking about there must be a different way to doing this. Or when I worked at that startup 15 years ago, it seemed to work a lot better because we were all in one team and we all talked to each other. And actually, I could do the system admin as well as the dev, and I did have access to the production systems and all of those sort of conversations. So really, it's about supporting leadership and supporting individuals in the organisation to help them, their learning paths, to go down their learning paths, help them understand what a canary deployment is, why shooting the messenger is a bad idea culturally, why it's important that the backlog is visible and transparent to people, why we inspect it every 2 weeks instead of writing a big project plan and then rushing to do all the testing at the end, and then it's late and expensive, and then we finish and then we all go off and do something else and never have a proper retrospective about whether it did what we intended. So there's lots of things that people can do. We can assess capability, we can do training, we can do value stream mapping, we can implement tools like value stream management. There's a whole host of different things that can help people on these journeys.
So I think having a coach is the operative word. Someone that can help you. It's like, this is what would help us move forward or where we are, assessing us, that kind of thing.
I think it's hard, even for really, really amazing kind of transformational leaders. It's hard when you're in that bubble to see out. And I think the advantage of DevOps coaches is often that they go into lots of different organizations and they're also emotionally a bit more disconnected. So it's easier for them to come in, see what's happening, see it against the patterns of everything they've seen everywhere else, and be emotionally disconnected enough to say the things that need to be said. And help things move forward and not kind of be caught in that bubble.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much, Helen. It's always great to chat with you. Fascinating topic, and I think super applicable to DevOps, to leadership, and just our current situation. So encourage people to check out. There's lots of mindfulness resources too. And it's easy to get started. It sounds like a big word. 10 minutes and it's amazing. It's like a cat nap for the mind,
Totally. So talking about those sort of resources, I use an app called Asana Rebel for yoga, which I would highly recommend. I normally try and do a 25-minute yoga session first, and then I do a 10-minute yoga session from another app called Calm, which is the very excellent Tamara Levitt, who just has the most beautiful voice, and she's very forgiving. So I have friends that say they can't meditate because their mind won't stop and they can't concentrate. And everyone's mind is like that. And Tamara kind of explains that in every little session. She'll kind of like go, and if you're thinking about something else, come back to your breathing. And she gets that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Have a good rest of your day. And thanks everyone for joining us on the segment today.
Thank you so much.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Wow, two great segments from the Accelerated Strategies team today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a heck of a Tuesday. We had an amazing presentation, first time presented in DevOps and Business Continuity by John Willis. And I hope you guys enjoyed that. We broke some news with Chip Childers, the new director of the Cloud Foundry Foundation. And then just two great pieces from Mitchell Ashley and the Accelerated Strategies Group team. I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. I certainly did. And just a quick reminder again, if you have any questions, comments for the authors, suggestions, join our Slack channel. Go to techstrong.tv, put in your email address, and it will send you out a invite to the Slack channel. By the way, we're not collecting email addresses for email or anything like that. It's strictly a script that pops out an invite to the Slack channel for you. Of course, if you'd like to join our email list, you can at any of the Media Ops sites. Anyway, until tomorrow, for Tuesday, April 7th, this is Alan Schimmel for Media Ops on the Digital Anarchist Network for TechStrong TV.